Blog Talk Radio.
Purely rational.
All right, first things first. Can you all hear me out there? Type something in chat if you can hear me. Am I coming across loud and clear? Do I sound like I'm in a airplane bathroom? Anybody who listened to last week's show totally understands what I'm talking about. You know, I spent 30 minutes talking to myself on last week's podcast, and then I went back and I listened to the recording, and I sounded like I was in a wind tunnel. Apparently, I'm having those troubles now. I'm getting a message that my audio is not coming across clearly. Let me try to fix this real quick. All right, testing. Can you hear me now? Am I coming across clearly? We really need to get this panned out. Blog Talk Radio, you have a good studio, but boy, it's difficult. All right. Sorry about the delay, folks. Just trying to get this audio drama figured out. Like I said, last week I went and recorded a podcast for last week's show. I had it all planned out. I spent days working on the format of how I was going to get into everything, and then I go back and I listen to it. I can't understand a damn thing I was saying. You know, I was going to re-record it and put it back out as like, you know, a pre-recorded thing, like, you know, here's episode 3.5, but I figured, hell with it. If anything, at least I set myself a low bar for this week's show. So anyway, sorry for the delay. You're listening to the Purely Rational Podcast, and this is Jay. You can find us at www.purelyrational.com. Or you can like us on Facebook at facebook.com/purelyrationalblog. And at any point during the show, if you want to be part of the show, you can go ahead and give us a call. If you come to the podcast link that I've posted all over every corner of Facebook, you'll see the number at the top of the screen. That number is United States area code 646-478-4427. I'd love to hear from you. Today we'll be talking about this notion that this biblical notion, this fallacy that the universe was created with humans in mind, that it was created solely to serve the purpose of human beings. Now, what I mean by that, when I'm talking about creation in this podcast, I'll be talking only about the universe, not so much the human creation as the antithesis to evolution. We're not really touching on that here, but the creation of the universe as a whole. And if you'll notice when you read Genesis and you listen to these myths about biblical creation, it stands to reason about this, but they always speak as if Earth is the only thing that exists. They may make reference to the universe, you know, the stars in the sky and the heavens, but they didn't know anything about it at the time it was written. So everything that they speak of in terms of creation is centered around human beings and the earth. And to me, that just goes to prove how man-made these stories are. You know, and it's a totally arrogant notion that this vast universe was created just for lowly old us, this tiny little planet orbiting this tiny little star in some corner of some galaxy in the middle of the universe. And by arrogant, I truly do mean the definition of the word arrogant, self-centered. You know, it's I think people who believe this really have no true understanding of the vastness of the universe and how insignificant we really are. let's take some perspective here. Let's take a look at the perspective. Me, for example, I am one guy. I am one guy in an entire species of humans. And this species of humans coexists with, roughly 8.5 million species of other animals on this planet, not counting the ones that have gone extinct in the history of time. We're just going with what's here today. And this planet, it exists in a solar system with 7 other planets orbiting one star. And this one star exists in a galaxy called the Milky Way. And the Milky Way has 200 billion, roughly, stars. And this Milky Way galaxy, it exists in a galaxy cluster, a supercluster called the Virgo supercluster, in which there are roughly 1,500 other galaxies. And guess what? That's not the only supercluster. There are millions of superclusters within the universe. Think of that immense size in terms of how significant we must really be in the grand scheme of things. We are a drop of water in the vast ocean that is the universe. You know, how many stars must that be? Well, we'll get into that later. I'll start throwing out some interesting numbers on estimates of how many stars there are, but take a wild guess. Each of those stars are at least, the closest star to us, I believe, is 90-something light years away. Each star is 100 to millions of light years away from each other. How big must the universe be? And to think that it was created just for you, just as a paradise for you to live in, that you may come to after you die because you believed in the right guy. Yeah, I'm not sure that I buy it. Some people say that the universe is too fine-tuned, the earth is too fine-tuned, it's in too much of a perfect place to have happened by accident. We must have been created. They say that all the things that must have come into place to allow for life to exist on the planet Earth is too much of a coincidence to have happened by chance. There must have been intelligence behind it. And, yeah, I'll give you that. I'll give you that it seems highly improbable. There's a lot of things going for us that are, if one thing went wrong, we wouldn't be here. For example, we're at this perfect Goldilocks range. People like to throw out that term, this Goldilocks range from the sun, where we're just close enough to where it's not too hot, but it's not too cold. And we've got an axial tilt to our planet that gives us seasons. That helps out our crops and allows for species to live in different parts of the planet in different ways. And, we've got this atmosphere, this ozone layer that protects us from ultraviolet rays, just everything kind of working together. It's seemingly so that we can be here. But the way I understand it, it's not so much that these things happen so that we can be here. It's more along the lines of we're here because those things have allowed it to happen. You see what I'm saying? If we're here because of those things. I don't know if I made that too clear, but let's talk about the probability of it all. I'll give you that it's highly unlikely that a planet would be in a position like ours to where it could support life. I mean, it must be very rare. But as Lawrence Krauss says, it's a huge universe, and very rare things happen all the time. So if you read my last article that we posted, I'm basically plagiarizing myself here on the podcast, but I thought it was a good point, so I'll repeat it here. Let's take a look at what improbability is from a cosmological standpoint. The vastness of the universe, what exactly does it take for something to be so improbable that it just can't happen? How many stars are there in the universe? Well, our scientists, they don't have a way of counting each and every star, but they've got a rough estimate. They took a picture of a small segment of the night sky, and they observed some thousands of galaxies. I'm not sure the exact number in this small segment of sky, and from that, they expounded that there must be an average of about roughly 100 billion galaxies in the universe, in the observable universe. That's a lot of galaxies. Now, on average, the average galaxy has roughly 100 billion stars. So 100 billion galaxies with 100 billion stars, easy math with lots of zeros tells you there's roughly, this is a very rough estimate, I understand, but there's roughly 10 to the power of 22 stars in the universe. That is a huge number. I wrote out the commas, and I think I'm saying this correctly. It's 100 sextillion. Either way, it's an enormous number. So with all those stars out there, our sun being one of them, how many do you think might have planets around them that could possibly sustain life? Well, I'm not sure. We've observed planets around other stars, but we can only speculate as to whether or not they can have life. So let's just kind of arbitrarily add a probability to it. How's 1 in a million sound? No, that's not enough. That's not enough. I think the odds to hit the Mega Millions lottery, that's a lottery in the United States. People stupidly throw their dollars away on the hopes of hitting this number to win themselves millions of bucks. It never happens, but I've got the number right here. The Mega Millions lottery is a 1 in 175 million roughly chance of winning. So we'll make it more rare than that. Let's say the probability of a planet orbiting a star that could sustain life is 1 in a billion. Does that sound good? Let's make the point even more clear. Let's make it way, 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 way improbable. How about there's a 1 in 100 trillion chance that a star could have a planet around it like ours that's capable of sustaining life. That's a pretty long shot of a chance. I mean, 100 trillion is a big number. Put that into perspective. I did a little math problem here. If you were to count to 100 trillion at a rate of one number per second, it would take you 3,168,876 years. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to do that in a lifetime, but you see what I mean. Had somebody else, I just like to illustrate this because I don't think people understand the enormity of numbers like this. So I want to kind of add another way of understanding the size of these numbers. I was watching a video one time. Somebody explained what exactly a trillion is. And they said, oh, well, you guys are hearing my Doberman right now. He's old and senile. Don't mind him. Anyway, somebody was describing exactly what a trillion is. And in doing so, they said if you took $1,000 bills and you stacked them up until you had $1 million, that would be roughly 4 inches high. You'd have a 4-inch stack of $1,000 bills. You have $1 million in your hand. That's a lot of money. Now, if you stacked them up high enough to have $1 trillion, you know how high that stack of money would be? I'm not making this up. 67 miles. That's stacked one on top of another. I'm not talking about end to end, one on top of another. 67 miles high the stack would be. So as you can see, 1 trillion is an incredibly high number. We're talking about 1 in 100 trillion. So have I hammered the point home that this is some pretty rough odds? So let's do the math. There's 10 to the 22 stars in the galaxy. 1 in 100 trillion chance that one of them might have a planet that can sustain life. So how many planets must there be out there? There's still 100 million planets, just like Earth. You see, it's not terribly improbable. It is rare. It is rare, but in the vast universe, it happens all the time. Just as Krauss says, rare things happen all the time. It's crazy to think of numbers like this. Supernovas. They say that one happens in every galaxy. I think it's like every 20 years or something like that, and they still can be observed every day. We're talking about massive, massive, massive amounts of numbers, and we think that the entire universe was created just for us humans. It's very interesting, and let's talk about the fine tuning. The fine-tuning of the universe, the creationists, they say we're so fine-tuned we must have been created. Yeah, sure, there's a lot of things in place that allow for us to exist, as I talked about earlier, but how fine-tuned are we exactly? I mean, yeah, we're capable of surviving on our planet, but our planet exists in a solar system it's a shooting gallery of asteroids. We're lucky that we have an atmosphere that can burn up the small ones, but we have cataclysmic asteroids flying around our solar system all the time. It's only a matter of time before one of significant size hits us, much like the one that probably took out the dinosaurs. And then here's an interesting one. It's kind of scary if you ask me. You know what a gamma ray burst is? That's really interesting. When a really big star dies, all of its mass collapses down into a small point. It explodes into a supernova. It sends out massive energy in every direction. But another thing that it does is this gamma ray burst phenomenon. From its poles, it shoots out a beam of gamma rays, and it is the most energetic event known in the universe. It sends this beam out across the universe with intense energy, and it doesn't stop until that energy is used, absorbed by something. If by chance we happen to be in the line of fire of a gamma ray burst, goodbye Earth. How fine-tuned is that? And then you've got the notion that the closest galaxy to us, the Andromeda Galaxy, is on a crash collision course with the Milky Way, with our galaxy. At some point in the future, our two galaxies will collide and create probably an elliptical galaxy of some kind, but I don't think it's not going to be violent. I don't think it's going to be fun. I mean, we won't be around to know it. And you know why we won't be around to know it? Another little imperfect thing about our solar system. Our sun's going to kill us before that happens. That is an inevitable fact about this Earth, is at some point, the sun's going to grow. That's just the kind of star it is. It's going to grow into a red giant, and it's going to vaporize the Earth, make it inhabitable just by the sheer heat. And then at some point, it'll grow, they say, out to roughly where Jupiter is. Now, I don't know if that means that it'll move to a further orbit away from the sun, or if it'll just swallow the Earth as a whole. But long before that, we will have been incinerated, and life would have been impossible. So I'm not too sure about all this fine-tuning. I think it's just more luck. I think chance is more reasonable at this point than an intelligent being, because if an intelligent being created the universe in a snap, like he says in Genesis, and in one day, boom, the universe exists, that's a pretty intelligent guy. That's omniscience right there. And you'd think he might have thought of these things, like not having our sun destroy our Earth, not having meteors and asteroids flying through space on crash courses with our Earth. Little things like that. That's not to mention all the little events that we have on Earth. Our tectonic plates shifting, shaking the ground, destroying cities and volcanoes and hurricanes. Yeah, there's nothing intelligent about this design. Chance is much more reasonable in this case. There's a lot out there that science doesn't understand. Of course there is. That's what science is for. If we understood everything, there would be no need for science. We ask these interesting questions. Why are we here? Where did we come from? What happens when we die? Things like that. We ask these questions, and the scientific community studies the evidence until they come up with a conclusion. If they can't come up with a conclusion, they study and study and study and try to find more evidence. And in almost every case in the course of human history, we've eventually come up with the answer. Years and years ago, we didn't understand what those little dots were in the sky. Here's one for you. 100 years ago, we couldn't fathom the idea of whether there was or wasn't life on Mars. You ever heard of that Orson Welles story, War of the Worlds, rather, where he came on the radio and told this big epic long story about this invasion from the planet Mars. The Martians came to attack our planet, and he portrayed it as a news story. It actually sounded like a news story. He had like other people. It sounded like politicians talking on the radio. It was all fiction, but it presented itself almost as not fiction. So if you tuned in a little late on the radio show, you might have been fooled, as were many people. And society went into pandemonium thinking we were being attacked by Martians. That was only 100 years ago. Every school child today knows that there's no life on Mars, or if there is, it's microbial, and we're trying to study that as we speak. 100 years ago, we could have been convinced that there was armies on Mars prepared to attack us. Today, right now as we speak, there's an Earthling rover scooping up dirt, sending data back to Earth to see if there's water, to see if there's a capability of life on Mars. That's what science does when we have questions. Just when science has questions, it doesn't mean that you get to insert your mythology where those questions can't be answered yet. Just because our Earth seems to have been created because it's in such a perfect position to sustain life doesn't mean you get to make up fairy tales to answer those questions. Those questions are answered by science. When you speak of things that are composed of physical properties and elements in the real world, that can be studied by science and should be answered by science. It is quite all right to say, I don't know, but I'm interested. What is the point of coming up with your own little stories of fairy tales and invisible skymen and crucifying divine Jesus just because you don't know the answer? You don't know the answer of our origins. Curiosity is what's gotten us this far where we're at now. We should take pride in curiosity and not knowing. There was a point in time when we were certain that the sun was actually a god that was pulling a golden chariot across the sky. We were certain of that. And that god is now a myth because science can understand exactly what the sun is, what it's made of, why it's there, and why it appears to be pulled across our sky. The same can be said of the ocean with Poseidon, the wind, the moon, the weather, lightning. These were all gods, and now they're myths. Yes, at one point, these things were unexplainable. We didn't know why they happened, so we assigned a god to them. We inserted our mythology where science should have taken over. And then when science finally caught up, when we were able to study these things, any little kid knows that the ocean moves by itself because of the gravity of the moon. Any kid knows that the wind blows because of changes in temperature and air pressure. Any kid knows the moon is not a god, and that these weather changes happen because, again, air pressure, evaporation of water, they are not gods. And I don't think we have any reason to believe that we're on the right track by inserting our myths today. Every god in the history of our civilization, minus the modern Judeo-Christian gods, have been disproven through scientific progress. Who are we to think that Yahweh is going to be any different? If you take past precedents into account, it's been a pretty bad idea to try and insert some divine answer to these questions rather than just have curiosity and study the evidence. That's what I'm here to encourage. I've been getting a lot of crap lately from people about the name Purely Rational, and I want to kind of clear the water on that a little bit. Okay, I'm not declaring to anybody that I am the most rational person in the world, that I'm smarter than anybody, that I am purely rational. I am Jay. And Jay made a website called Purely Rational, and the reason for that is I believe that is the path by which we can achieve human progress. I think if everybody tries to think rationally and put their myths aside, these myths that divide people and cause undue hate. And I'm going to go on a little tangent here, but I was just on a conversation earlier on Facebook where this guy was belittling women. He was saying that if women aren't supposed to be submissive and subservient, then why were they created weaker than us? If it weren't for Christian or Islamic mythology, that question would have never been asked. That same person would appreciate women and what they have to contribute to society. Hopefully one day he gets his ass kicked by a woman. That would be really funny, but I won't be there to see it. I believe he's from another country. Anyways, back to my point. I believe that rationality is the key. We find ourselves in these wars fighting over holy books. We find our wacko fringe churches stomping on the funerals of soldiers and dead babies in Connecticut over Scripture. We find politicians trying to block the teaching of science in schools because of Scripture, literally trying to make people stupid because it offends their Scripture. That's not how we progress. And if we stay on this track for too long, we're gonna run out of resources or kill each other off. We're gonna somehow end our progress, or perhaps end the human race. I hate to sound melodramatic, and I don't think that I'm going to be able to affect that kind of change, but I can try. If nothing else, I can vent. But that's what I mean by purely rational. I'm just encouraging people to think rationally. I'm not saying you have to agree with me. I'm not saying I'm the smartest person in the world. I'm not by a long shot. You'll see me quote a lot smarter people than me, and that's for a reason, because I ain't that smart. I'm not even that good of a DJ. I'm kind of winging this podcast thing. I can't believe anybody's listening. But with that said, thanks for hanging in there for this little 30-minute podcast. I'm sorry again about last week. Maybe in the future, if there becomes a demand for it, I'll re-record that thing, or maybe we'll do another podcast with the same topic. But people didn't really seem like they were too into that topic, so I just kind of left it as is. And if nothing else, it'll stay in the archives as a little funny lesson learned at the beginning of Purely Rational. So, again, thanks for listening. You can find us on www.purelyrational.com, and you can visit us on Facebook at facebook.com/purelyrationalblog. As always, I encourage you to come on to our website, check out our articles. We got some really good writers starting up, hoping to get some more in the future. I'm in talks with a couple people right now for future podcasts, a couple authors. I don't want to give anything out right now because nothing's set in stone, but some people that wrote some really interesting books are probably going to come on and interview with me on the show, and hopefully give some direction that I'm not so skilled at giving. Thanks for hanging in there as we work this thing out. We'll talk to you guys later.